February 8th, 1945, Eastern Silesia. One Stuka dive bomber versus 40 Soviet T-34 tanks. Major Hans-Ulrich Rudel crouched in the cockpit, watching his right leg hang useless, shredded below the knee by a 37mm flak shell that had detonated 3 meters from his aircraft. Bone jutted through torn flight suit. Blood pooled on the rudder pedals. He was 32 years old, a Lutheran pastor's son who had been rejected from Luftwaffe fighter pilot training twice for insufficient aggression. He had destroyed 518 tanks before today. This would be number 519, or he would bleed out in the cockpit before reaching German lines. The Soviet tank column was 400 meters below, moving through snow at 15 kilometers per hour. His altitude was 2,200 meters and dropping. His airspeed was 320 kilometers per hour and climbing. He rolled the Stuka into an 80-degree dive and pointed the nose at the lead tank. Behind him in the rear gunner position, Sergeant Ernst Gotterman fired the single 7.92mm machine gun at Soviet fighters circling above. "Yaks at 4 o'clock high, 2 of them closing fast." Rudel did not acknowledge. His world had compressed to the gun sight reticle drifting across the lead T-34, the airspeed indicator climbing past 500 kilometers per hour, and the altimeter unwinding so fast the needle blurred. Flak bursts appeared around the Stuka in irregular black puffs, each one close enough to rock the aircraft with concussion waves. One burst detonated 15 meters ahead. Shrapnel tore through the port wing fabric with sounds like someone ripping canvas. The Stuka shuddered but held course. 1,800 meters altitude, 1,600, 1,400. The tank was growing larger in the sight, turret traversing skyward but too slow, always too slow when dive angles exceeded 70 degrees. At 600 meters altitude, Rudel felt the control stick vibrate in his hands. Engine trouble. Probably flak damage to the oil cooler because the temperature gauge was climbing past redline into the zone where engines seized from heat stress. He ignored it. 5 seconds to weapons release. 4, 3. The tank commander was visible now in the open hatch, face turned upward, probably screaming orders his crew could not hear over engine noise. Rudel centered the reticle on the engine deck just behind the turret, where armor was thinnest. He squeezed both cannon triggers at 400 meters altitude. The twin 37mm BK 3.7 cannons, mounted under the wings, fired with hammering recoil that slowed the Stuka noticeably, each round weighing 1.4 kilograms and leaving the muzzle at 850 meters per second. Orange tracer elements painted lines through winter air connecting aircraft to tank. Rudel held the triggers for exactly 1 second, firing 12 tungsten-core armor-piercing rounds, 6 from each cannon. Then he released and pulled the stick back with both hands, while his good left leg jammed the left rudder pedal because his shredded right leg could not provide counterpressure. The Stuka's wings groaned from G-forces as the dive transitioned into a climbing turn. Blood drained from his head. Vision tunneled to a narrow circle. Peripheral gray closed in from the edges. He kept pulling, counting seconds, waiting for either consciousness to return or the ground to kill him. Gatterman's voice cracked over the intercom. "Hit! Engine's burning! You got him!" Rudel's vision cleared at 900 meters altitude as blood returned to his brain. He risked a glance back. The lead T-34 was stopped in the road, trailing black smoke from the engine compartment where his rounds had penetrated top armor and detonated ammunition storage or fuel tanks. Secondary explosions blew hatches off. Crew members bailed out with uniforms burning. The other tanks in the column were scattering, breaking formation, turrets searching sky for the threat that had already climbed above effective range. Tank number 519. Rudel turned west toward German lines 40 kilometers away and tried to assess whether he would make it before bleeding out. The belt tourniquet around his thigh was holding, but blood still seeped from the wound, running down his leg, pooling in his boot, overflowing onto the rudder pedal and cockpit floor. His right foot below the injury hung at an unnatural angle connected by tendons and a strip of skin, but functionally severed. He could see the white end of his tibia protruding through shredded muscle. The pain was extraordinary, sharp and grinding simultaneously, the kind that made coherent thought difficult. He bit down on his leather glove to keep from screaming, because screaming used oxygen, and oxygen was required for flying. The oil temperature gauge was still climbing. 110 degrees Celsius, 115, 120. The engine would seize at 140. He had maybe 10 minutes of flight time before catastrophic failure. "Lead, this is 2. His wingman, Lieutenant Hans Fels's voice came through static-filled radio. "Your aircraft is trailing smoke. Heavy damage visible on fuselage. Can you maintain altitude?" Rudel checked his instruments. Airspeed steady at 280 kilometers per hour. Altitude holding at 1,000 meters. Oil pressure dropping slowly, temperature still climbing. He keyed the radio. "I can maintain. Stay in formation. Watch for fighters." As if summoned by the mention, Gatorman opened fire again, the machine gun staccato hammering loud even through the intercom. "Yak 9 making a pass, coming in from 7 o'clock level." Rudel threw the Stuka into a shallow dive to pick up speed, because speed was the only defense when your maximum velocity was 200 kilometers per hour, slower than enemy fighters. Tracer rounds from the Yak's 20mm cannon walked across empty air where the Stuka had been 2 seconds earlier. The Soviet pilot overshot, climbed, turned to make another pass. Rudel leveled out at 800 meters. His engine temperature hit 125 degrees. Oil pressure was now critically low, needle hovering just above zero. The engine started making sounds it should not make, grinding metallic noises that suggested bearings running dry, pistons scoring cylinder walls, mechanical components deciding independently to stop being components and start being shrapnel. "He's coming around again," Gatorman fired in controlled bursts, tracers reaching toward the Yak, but falling short because the Soviet pilot was smart enough to stay outside effective range of a 7.92mm machine gun. The Yak's cannons flashed. Rudel heard impacts, sharp metallic pings, as 20mm rounds punched through the Stuka's thin aluminum skin and exited without hitting anything critical. One round shattered the canopy 6 inches from his head. Glass fragments sprayed across the cockpit. Wind screamed through the hole at 280 kilometers per hour, temperature minus 15 degrees Celsius, instantly freezing his face and hands. His blood-soaked flight suit stiffened. He could no longer feel his fingers on the control stick. The engine temperature hit 135 degrees, 5 degrees from seizure. German lines were still 30 kilometers away. At 280 kilometers per hour, that was 6.5 minutes of flight time, assuming the engine lasted 6.5 minutes, which the temperature gauge suggested it would not. Rudel did rapid calculations. He could maintain current course and hope the engine held together. Or he could dive to pick up speed, cover more distance faster, but stress the failing engine more and guarantee it seized before reaching friendly territory. Or he could gain altitude to give himself glide range if the engine quit, but climbing would drain speed and make him an easier target for the Yak that was lining up for another pass. He chose speed, pushed the stick forward into a shallow dive. Airspeed climbed to 320 kilometers per hour. Engine temperature hit 138 degrees, 139. The grinding sounds intensified. Something inside the engine was failing catastrophically. He could hear it. could feel it through the airframe as vibrations increased and the smooth roar of a healthy Junkers WW2 engine degraded into a rattling scream. Oil pressure dropped to zero. The propeller was still turning, but now from momentum and airflow rather than engine power. He was gliding, 30 kilometers to German lines. At his current glide ratio, maybe 20 kilometers of range before he was too low to clear terrain. "Lead! Your engine's on fire!" Fells's voice cut through the intercom. Rudel looked at the engine, cowling. Orange flames licked back from the exhaust manifold, fed by leaking oil, spreading along the cowling seams. Black smoke trailed behind the aircraft. He had minutes before the fire reached fuel lines, or the magnesium engine components ignited and turned the entire power plant into a fireball. He could bail out, parachute down into Soviet-held territory, become a prisoner if they did not shoot him during descent. Or he could try to stretch the glide, reach German lines, crash land in friendly territory, and hope the crash did not kill him before blood loss did. Gatterman stopped firing. "I'm out of ammunition. The yak's still following us. Range about 200 meters. He's lining up." Rudel waited. The Soviet pilot was cautious now, had probably seen too many seemingly helpless German aircraft that turned and fought with their last rounds. He would circle, observe, wait for confirmation that the Stuka was truly helpless before closing for the kill. That gave Rudel maybe 30 seconds. He nosed the Stuka down steeper, trading altitude for speed and distance, 400 kilometers per hour. The airframe shook. Control surfaces started buffeting as airspeed approached design limits. 420. Fabric tearing sounds from the wings as overstressed control surfaces flexed beyond tolerances. The fire intensified. Flames now visible along the entire engine, cowling, smoke pouring back across the canopy, obscuring forward vision. Heat radiated through the firewall into the cockpit. Rudel's face burned from proximity to heated metal. His frozen fingers thawed in the heat, then started burning. He could smell his own blood cooking on hot metal surfaces. 20 kilometers to German lines. 15. 10. The yak was closing, cannon muzzle flashes visible in the black smoke behind him. Rounds walked up the Stuka's fuselage. One hit the tail assembly with a sharp crack. The aircraft yawed right. Rudel corrected, but the controls felt wrong, sluggish, damaged. At 5 kilometers from German lines, Rudel saw a small airfield ahead, just a cleared strip in snow with some tents and parked vehicles. Friendly. He aimed for it. Altitude 200 meters and dropping fast. Airspeed 180 kilometers per hour and bleeding off as the glide angle steepened. No engine power. No hydraulics for landing gear. The Stuka would belly land at whatever speed he carried when he hit ground. He pulled back gently to flare, scrubbing speed. 150 kilometers per hour. 120. The ground rushed up. He yanked the stick back hard. The Stuka's tail struck first, then the belly. Metal screamed as the aircraft skidded across frozen earth, spinning slowly clockwise. The left wing clipped a tent and tore away. The fuselage kept sliding. After 70 meters and 5 seconds that felt like minutes, the wreck stopped moving. Rudel's head had hit the instrument panel during impact. Blood ran from a new cut above his eye, mixing with the old blood from his leg. Gatterman was shouting something. The cockpit filled with smoke from the still-burning engine. Rudel released his harness, tried to stand, fell because he only had one functional leg. Hands grabbed him from outside. Ground crew pulling him through the shattered canopy. Someone was screaming. He realized it was him. The pain had been manageable when adrenaline masked it, but now with the aircraft stopped, and his body recognizing it was not required to fly anymore, the pain became total, overwhelming, a red wall that collapsed his vision into a bright point and then into nothing. He woke in a field hospital tent, unclear how much time had passed. A doctor was bent over his leg with instruments. Rudel could smell antiseptic and burned meat, which he realized was his own cooked flesh. The doctor looked up. "You're awake. Good. The leg is gone below the knee. Shrapnel severed major vessels. You lost approximately 2 liters of blood. You're alive because you tourniqueted it immediately. I've seen a lot of wounded pilots. Most who take flak damage like this don't make it back. You flew 40 kilometers with a severed leg and a burning engine. How?" Rudel thought about the question. How? Because the tank was still moving and killing his countrymen, and someone had to stop it. Because he had done this 2,029 times before, and muscle memory was stronger than pain. Because dying in a hospital bed was worse than dying in a cockpit. He said, "The tank is dead. That's what matters." The doctor stared at him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Yes, the tank is dead, and you're still alive, which means you'll fly again." He gestured to an orderly. "Prep him for amputation surgery. Clean the wound, close what we can save, and get me more plasma. He's going to need it." Rudel closed his eyes. In his mind, he was already calculating. How long until the leg healed? How long to learn to fly with a prosthetic? How many tanks were left between here and Berlin? The arithmetic was simple. The war was not over. His aircraft was destroyed, but there were other Stukas. His leg was gone, but he still had arms, and one good leg and eyes that could aim cannon fire through armor at ranges where other pilots gave up. The Soviet army had thousands of tanks. He had destroyed 519. The equation was incomplete. 6 weeks, he decided. 6 weeks to heal enough to walk. 8 weeks to convince the doctors to clear him for flight duty. 10 weeks until he was back over the Eastern Front, diving at 70 degrees through flak, because someone had to do it, and he was better at it than anyone else. The pain would still be there. The missing leg would still be missing. But the tanks would still be moving, and the BK 3.7 cannons still fired 12 rounds, and gravity still pulled Stukas into dives that ended with tanks burning. He opened his eyes and looked at the doctor. "How soon can I return to my squadron?" The doctor stopped mid-suture and stared. Then he laughed, short and humorless. "You just lost your leg. You nearly bled out. Your aircraft is scrap metal, and you want to know when you can fly again." He shook his head. 2 months minimum, probably 3, possibly never if the wound gets infected. He went back to suturing. "But knowing you, Major, I'll see you back here in 6 weeks demanding a medical clearance." He pulled the suture tight. "The war will still be here. The tanks will still be here. Rest, heal, then we'll see." Rudel nodded and closed his eyes again. 6 weeks. That was acceptable. The Soviets had thousands of tanks. He had time. Outside the tent, the remains of his Stuka still smoldered, black smoke rising into gray winter sky. The aircraft had carried him through 2,530 combat missions, been shot down 30 times, crashed 4 times, taken thousands of holes from flak and bullets, and still flown him home every time except this last time when it burned trying. The ground crew would salvage what they could. The BK 3.7 cannons, if they were not too warped. The gun sight, if it survived impact. The radio equipment. The rest would be melted down and reformed into something else. That was how wars worked. Metal became weapons, became scrap, became weapons again, until one side ran out of metal or men or will. Rudel had plenty of will. The metal was Germany's problem. The men were dying daily. But as long as one Stuka remained airworthy and one pilot remained capable of aiming it, Soviet tanks would continue to burn on frozen roads in Silesia and Poland, and eventually Germany itself. The mathematics demanded it. 519 tanks destroyed. Thousands remained. The equation required balancing. He heard Gotterman's voice outside the tent, arguing with someone about retrieving personal items from the wreck. His gunner had survived the crash with minor cuts. Good. Experienced gunners were harder to replace than aircraft. Rudel made a mental note to recommend him for a decoration. Then he drifted into unconscious darkness where there was no pain, no burning engines, no flak bursts, no Soviet tanks moving through winter fog. Just silence and stillness and the mathematical certainty that when he woke, the war would still be waiting. 6 weeks later, March 20th, 1945. Rudel climbed into a replacement Stuka at a forward airfield near Frankfurt an der Oder, prosthetic leg strapped tight to his right thigh, metal foot resting on the rudder pedal. The leg was steel and leather, engineered by the same factory that made aircraft landing gear, functional but crude. It weighed 3 kilograms. His real leg had weighed less than 2. The extra weight changed his center of balance in the cockpit. Gatterman climbed into the rear gunner position without comment. They had flown together for 18 months. Words were unnecessary. Target, Soviet tank column crossing the Oder River, 40 kilometers east. Intelligence reported 60 T-34s and 20 JS-2 heavy tanks advancing toward Berlin. Largest concentration Rudel had seen in months. He started the engine. Oil pressure normal, temperature normal. Everything worked except the leg that was not there. Phantom pain radiated from the amputation site, nerve endings firing signals about a foot that no longer existed. The doctors said it would fade. 6 weeks later, it had not. He taxied to the runway, advanced throttle, felt the tail lift as airspeed climbed past 80 kilometers per hour. The Stuka lifted off. He retracted landing gear manually, the crank handle requiring 30 revolutions that made his shoulder ache. His wingman, a new replacement pilot named Lieutenant Werner Kahl, formed up on his port side. Kahl was 20 years old, had logged 60 combat hours total, would probably be dead within a month. Rudel keyed the radio. "Stay close. Follow my dive pattern exactly. Do not deviate." They found the Soviet column at 14:47 hours, stretched across 5 kilometers of frozen farmland, tanks moving in multiple parallel lines with supporting infantry and self-propelled guns. Rudel counted 40 visible tanks before giving up, too many to track individually. He selected the lead vehicle, a T-34-85 with a white number 301 painted on the turret, and climbed to 2,400 meters to position for attack. Anti-aircraft fire started immediately. The Soviets had learned. Where they used to position flak guns around the perimeter of columns, they now integrated them directly into formation. 37-millimeter guns on half-tracks, firing in coordinated patterns calculated to fill attack corridors with steel. Rudel watched the black puffs appear at 2,000 meters, adjusted his approach to come in from the north, where gun density looked lighter. He rolled inverted and pulled through into an 80-degree dive. The prosthetic leg felt wrong on the rudder pedal, less responsive than muscle and bone, the feedback delayed by mechanical linkages. At 1,800 meters altitude, a flak burst detonated 20 meters ahead. The Stuka flew through the smoke trail. Shrapnel rattled against the engine cowling. Another burst at 1,400 meters, this one closer, concussion wave jarring the aircraft sideways. Rudel corrected with aileron, kept the dive angle steep. The lead tank grew larger in the gun sight. He could see the commander in the open hatch, see the turret traverse mechanism swinging the main gun skyward in futile defense. At 500 meters altitude, he fired. The BK 3.7 cannons hammered. 12 rounds in 1 second. The recoil slowed the Stuka noticeably. Tracer rounds converged on the tank's engine deck. Multiple impacts. The tank exploded, turret lifting on a column of flame, then crashing down inverted. Secondary explosions rippled through the hull as ammunition cooked off. Rudel pulled out at 200 meters, so low he could see individual Soviet soldiers diving for cover, could see the expressions on their faces transition from shock to terror to rage. Tank number 520. He climbed back to altitude, circled, watched his wingman Karl dive on a second target. Cale's dive was shallower, his release altitude higher, his rounds scattered. The tank he targeted was damaged but not destroyed, smoke pouring from perforated armor, but crew still bailing out alive. Rudel keyed the radio. Steeper angle, release at 400 meters, not 600. Try again. Over the next 90 minutes, Rudel destroyed 4 more tanks, bringing his total to 524. Karl destroyed 1, his first confirmed kill, and damaged 2 others. They returned to base at 1620 hours with Rudel's Stuka carrying 17 new flak holes and Karl's aircraft trailing hydraulic fluid from a damaged landing gear actuator. Karl crash landed with gear up, walked away with minor cuts. Rudel's prosthetic leg had slipped off the rudder pedal twice during combat maneuvering, forcing him to reach down and reposition it manually while pulling out of dives. The leather straps chafed his stump. Blood seeped through the dressing. He landed, taxied to dispersal, shut down the engine, and sat in the cockpit for 5 minutes while ground crew worked around him. They had learned not to rush him. Climbing out required concentration when you had to swing one real leg and one steel mechanism out of a confined cockpit. That night in the officer's tent, a Luftwaffe colonel arrived from Berlin with orders. The Red Army was advancing on multiple fronts. German forces were conducting fighting retreats toward prepared defensive lines that kept collapsing faster than units could occupy them. Soviet tank formations were breaking through weak points, encircling entire divisions, cutting supply lines. Air support was critical. Rudel's unit would fly 6 to 8 sorties daily until further notice. Pilots would rotate only for mechanical maintenance or medical incapacity. Expected duration, indefinite. Expected casualties, high. The colonel delivered this information without emotion, accepted no questions, departed in a staff car that disappeared east toward headquarters. March 21st through April 10th, 1945 blurred into repetition. Wake at 0500 hours, briefing at 0530, first mission at 0600, attack Soviet columns advancing on Silo Heights. Return, rearm. Second mission at 0900, attack tank concentrations near Kustrin. Return, rearm. Third mission at 1200, fourth at 1500, fifth at 1800 if daylight remained. Rudel flew 7 missions on March 23rd, 8 on March 29th, 6 on April 2nd, when weather grounded aircraft for the afternoon. By April 10th, he had added 36 tanks to his count, bringing the total to 560. His prosthetic leg broke twice, the steel ankle joint fracturing from sustained rudder pressure during violent pullouts. A field mechanic welded it each time, reinforcing the joint with scrap metal scavenged from wrecked aircraft. The Soviet response intensified. Orders circulated through Red Army units. Priority target, Hans-Ulrich Rudel. Reward 100,000 rubles for confirmed kill. Fighter regiments received specific instructions. Identify Stuka formations operating near known tank concentrations. Vector fighters to intercept during attack runs when Stukas were most vulnerable. Anti-aircraft batteries coordinated fire patterns, filling predicted dive corridors with timed barrages calculated to detonate at 400 to 600 meters altitude, where Rudel typically released ordnance. None of it helped significantly. Rudel changed tactics daily. He attacked from different altitudes, different angles, different times. He studied Soviet radio communications intercepts, learned their coordination patterns, exploited gaps. On April 15, 1945, Rudel flew his 2,530th and final combat mission. Soviet forces had encircled Berlin. German command was fragmenting into isolated pockets with degraded communication. Rudel's unit, reduced to 12 operational aircraft from an original strength of 40, received orders to relocate west toward American lines. Surrender to Soviets meant execution or Siberian labor camps. Surrender to Americans meant prisoner of war status and eventual repatriation. The choice was obvious. Rudel took off at 800 hours with 11 other Stukas, formed up, turned west. They overflew Soviet positions one last time. Below, columns of T-34s advanced toward Berlin through villages that burned. Rudel could have dived, could have destroyed one more tank, two more, three. His cannons were loaded, his aircraft was functional, but the mathematics had changed. Germany was defeated. Adding tank number 520 or 530 would not alter the outcome. Survival was now the objective. They landed at an American-controlled airfield near Kitzingen at 11:35 hours. U.S. Army soldiers surrounded the aircraft, weapons raised, expressions uncertain about whether these were combatants or refugees. Rudel climbed out of the cockpit, prosthetic leg first, then his real leg, stood on the wing, raised both hands. An American captain approached, looked at the Stuka with its unit markings and kill tallies painted on the tail. 44 small tank silhouettes. Each one represented 10 actual kills. 440 tanks, minimum, by the visual record. The captain said in broken German, "You are prisoner now, weapons on ground, step down slow." Rudel complied. As his feet touched earth, the war ended for him. The Americans interrogated him for 3 days. They wanted to know about tank-killing tactics, dive-bombing techniques, German aircraft production capabilities, pilot training methods. Rudel answered factually, technical information only, nothing about strategic operations or unit deployments. On the 4th day, Soviet officers arrived demanding his extradition. The American commander refused. Rudel was Luftwaffe, not SS. He had engaged in conventional military operations, not war crimes. The Geneva Convention protected military prisoners. The Soviets could file official requests through proper channels. The Soviet officers left. Rudel never saw them again, but learned later that formal extradition demands continued for months, all rejected. He spent 2 years in American and British POW camps, first in Germany, then in Britain. Medical staff examined his prosthetic leg with professional interest. British surgeons offered to improve the design, fit him with a more sophisticated device that used rubber bushings and tension springs for improved mobility. Rudel accepted. The new leg worked better, weighed less, allowed him to walk without the pronounced limp that had marked his gait since the amputation. Other prisoners asked about his combat record. The numbers seemed impossible. 519 tanks. Some claimed 520 or more, depending on which records were consulted. 800 other vehicles, 150 artillery pieces, 70 landing craft, 1 battleship, 1 cruiser, 1 destroyer, 2,530 combat missions, shot down 30 times, wounded 5 times, 1 leg amputated, still flew. The interrogations continued periodically. American and British intelligence wanted details. How did he survive so long when life expectancy for Stuka pilots was measured in weeks? Rudel's answer was mathematical. He calculated optimal dive angles based on target armor thickness, flak gun positioning, and terrain. He studied enemy tactics, identified patterns, exploited predictability. He maintained aircraft obsessively, personally inspecting every maintenance action, rejecting any aircraft with even minor defects. He selected crew members for competence, not personality. Gotterman had survived because he was an excellent gunner who did not panic. Most importantly, Rudel committed absolutely to every attack. Hesitation got you killed. Once you started a dive, you finished it. physics and mathematics. Everything else was noise. In 1947, Rudel was released from British custody and returned to Germany. The country he found was divided, occupied, broken. The Luftwaffe no longer existed. There were no positions for former combat pilots in a nation forbidden from maintaining military aviation. Rudel worked briefly in construction, hated it, and emigrated to Argentina in 1948, where German expatriates had established communities and businesses. He started a small aircraft parts company manufacturing components for civilian aviation. The business succeeded modestly. He married, had children, lived quietly, except for occasional reunions with former Luftwaffe personnel, where they discussed tactics and missions and men who had not survived. He never renounced National Socialism. In interviews and books published in the 1950s and 60s, Rudel defended Wehrmacht actions, claimed the Luftwaffe had fought honorably, argued that Germany's defeat was tactical rather than moral. These statements caused repeated controversies. West German government officials invited him to military ceremonies, then withdrew invitations after public backlash. NATO allies objected to his presence at defense conferences where his tactical expertise was otherwise valued. Rudel remained unapologetic. He saw himself as a soldier who had executed military orders with exceptional skill. The politics that had sent him to war were separate from the technical problem of destroying armored vehicles from dive bombers. The Soviet Union never stopped trying to capture or kill him. In 1953, Soviet intelligence services attempted to kidnap him in Argentina. The attempt failed when Argentine police intervened after a neighbor reported suspicious vehicles. In 1960, another attempt in Paraguay was disrupted by local authorities. Rudel traveled with bodyguards afterward, varied his routes, maintained low profile. The 100,000 ruble reward remained active until the Soviet Union dissolved in 1991, by which time Rudel was 65 years old and living in Rosenheim, Germany, having returned to his home country in the 1970s. He died on December 18, 1982, age 66, from natural causes. His funeral attracted both admirers and protesters. Former Luftwaffe pilots attended to honor his combat record. Anti-fascist groups demonstrated outside the ceremony to condemn his political views. The West German government sent no official representatives. The debate about his legacy began immediately and has not resolved. Military historians study his tactics. Aviation experts analyze his techniques. Close air support doctrine used by modern air forces incorporates principles Rudel developed through trial and error over 2,530 missions. The A-10 Warthog ground attack aircraft, designed in the 1970s specifically for tank destruction, embodies many of his tactical concepts. Heavy frontal armor, redundant control systems, powerful anti-tank cannon, slow speed prioritizing accuracy over evasion. The final accounting is numerical. 519 tanks destroyed minimum, possibly as high as 544, depending on which records are consulted and how damaged versus destroyed is defined. 800 other military vehicles, 150 artillery positions, 70 landing craft, 1 battleship, 1 cruiser, 1 destroyer, 9 aircraft shot down in aerial combat, 2,530 combat missions, 30 times shot down by enemy action or forced to crash land from damage, 5 times wounded, 1 leg amputated. These numbers are documented in Luftwaffe records, Soviet after-action reports, and eyewitness accounts from both sides. They remain unmatched by any other pilot in aviation history. The closest comparable pilot destroyed fewer than 100 tanks. Whether destroying those tanks was heroic or simply efficient execution of military orders remains debated. Rudel fought for a regime that committed systematic atrocities. He never participated in those atrocities directly. He flew dive bombers against military targets. The moral calculus is complicated. Modern air forces study his methods while acknowledging the context. The tactics work regardless of the politics that deployed them. Physics and mathematics do not care about ideology. A Stuka diving at 70 degrees with 37mm cannons will destroy a tank if the pilot aims correctly. That reality persists independent of who gave the orders or why the war was fought. His prosthetic leg is displayed in a German aviation museum, mounted on a stand with a placard explaining its function and the circumstances under which it was required. Visitors photograph it. Some see it as evidence of determination and skill. Others see it as symbol of the cost of war. Both interpretations are accurate. The leg allowed Rudel to continue flying after most pilots would have been grounded. It also represents the violence that shattered human bodies and machinery in pursuit of territorial control and political ideology. The leg is steel and leather and history. It cannot be separated from the man who wore it or the context in which it was used. Hans Ulrich Rudel destroyed more tanks than any pilot in history using an obsolete aircraft, mathematical precision, and absolute commitment to completing every attack he started. The politics were wrong. The tactics were right. Both statements are true simultaneously. History contains multitudes. Chapter 3, May 8, 1945. American-controlled airfield, Kitzingen, Bavaria. Rudel climbed out of his Stuka for the last time and surrendered to a U.S. Army captain who stared at the kill markings painted on the tail. 50 small tank silhouettes. Each represented 10 confirmed kills. 500 tanks, minimum by visual record. The captain said in broken German, "You prisoner now? Weapons down?" Rudel complied. Behind him, 11 other Stukas from his squadron landed in sequence, pilots emerging with hands raised. The war was over. Germany had surrendered hours earlier. Soviet forces wanted him extradited for trial. The Americans refused. He was Luftwaffe, not SS. Geneva Convention protected military prisoners. American intelligence officers interrogated him for 6 days. They wanted tank-killing tactics, dive angles, armor penetration data, pilot training methods. Rudel answered with technical precision. 70 to 80-degree dives. Release at 300 to 400 meters altitude. Aim for engine deck where T-34 armor was 20 millimeters versus 45 millimeters on turret front. Fire 1-second bursts to prevent cannon overheating. Never hesitate once committed to attack. The officers recorded everything, cross-referenced it with captured Luftwaffe documents, confirmed the numbers. 519 tanks destroyed was conservative estimate. Some reports listed 544. Soviet records captured later confirmed 519 minimum with additional probables. British intelligence took over in June 1945. They wanted to know how he survived 2,530 combat missions when average Stuka pilot life expectancy was 14 missions. Rudel's answer was mathematical. He calculated optimal dive profiles based on ballistics and flak gun traverse rates. He studied enemy tactics, identified patterns, exploited predictability. He rejected aircraft with any mechanical defects. He selected crew members for competence. Godderman survived because he was competent. Most importantly, commitment. Once you started a dive, you finished it. Physics did not care about fear. The British officers nodded, made notes, recommended his tactics be studied by RAF ground attack squadrons. Soviet extradition demands continued through 1946. The NKVD filed 12 separate requests through official channels. All rejected. The Soviets offered prisoner exchanges, 20 German POWs for Rudel alone. The Americans refused. In 1947, Rudel was released from British custody and returned to West Germany. The country was divided, occupied, destroyed. The Luftwaffe no longer existed. No positions for combat pilots in a nation forbidden from military aviation. He worked construction for 8 months, hated it, and emigrated to Argentina in 1948, where German expatriates had established communities. In Buenos Aires, Rudel started an aircraft parts company manufacturing components for civilian aviation. The business succeeded modestly. He married, had children, published a memoir in 1952 titled Stuka Pilot that sold well in Germany and was translated into multiple languages. The book detailed his combat missions with technical precision, but also defended Wehrmacht actions and argued Germany had fought honorably. These statements caused immediate controversy. West German politicians invited him to military ceremonies, then withdrew invitations after public backlash. NATO officials valued his tactical expertise, but banned him from defense conferences when Allied governments objected. Soviet intelligence never stopped hunting him. In 1953, KGB operatives attempted kidnapping in Buenos Aires. Argentine police intervened after neighbors reported suspicious vehicles. In 1961, another attempt in Paraguay failed when local authorities were tipped off. Rudel traveled with bodyguards afterward, varied routes, maintained low profile. The 100,000 ruble reward remained active until the Soviet Union dissolved in 1991. By then, Rudel was 75 years old, living in Germany, and the Cold War had ended. He died December 18, 1982, age 66, from heart failure. His funeral in Dornhausen attracted both former Luftwaffe personnel and anti-fascist protesters. The West German government sent no official representatives. The debate began immediately. Military historians studied his tactics. Aviation experts analyzed his techniques. Anti-fascist groups condemned his political views. Both sides agreed on the numbers: 519 tanks minimum, 800 other vehicles, 150 artillery pieces, 70 landing craft, 1 battleship, 2,530 missions, shot down 30 times, wounded 5 times. The tactical legacy is documented. Modern close air support doctrine incorporates principles Rudel developed: steep dive angles for accuracy, focus on armored vehicle weak points, immediate commitment to attack runs, obsessive aircraft maintenance. The A-10 Warthog, designed in the 1970s specifically for tank destruction, embodies his concepts. Titanium armor protecting pilot and critical systems. GAU-8, Avenger 30mm cannon firing depleted uranium rounds. Slow speed prioritizing accuracy over evasion. Redundant flight controls. Every design choice reflects lessons learned from Stuka operations 1939 to 1945. Air forces worldwide study his methods while acknowledging the context. U.S. Air Force Weapons School includes his tactics and ground attack curriculum with historical footnote. Rudel fought for Nazi Germany. His political ideology was wrong. His tactics were effective. Study the tactics, reject the ideology. This separation is uncomfortable but necessary. Physics works regardless of politics. A 70-degree dive with anti-tank cannons will destroy armored vehicles if the pilot aims correctly. That reality persists independent of who gave orders or why wars were fought. The prosthetic leg is displayed in Deutsches Museum, Munich, mounted with placard reading, "Wooden prosthetic worn by Hans Ulrich Rudel after amputation, February 1945. Rudel returned to combat operations 6 weeks after surgery, flying with modified rudder controls. He completed 350 additional combat missions before war's end. Visitors photograph it. Aviation enthusiasts see engineering solution to physical disability. Others see symbol of obsessive militarism. Both interpretations coexist because historical artifacts contain multiple meanings simultaneously. The final accounting remains numerical and controversial. Rudel destroyed more tanks than any pilot in history by factor of 5. The closest comparable ace destroyed fewer than 100. His combat record is unmatched and will likely remain so because modern warfare does not produce circumstances where single pilots fly 2,530 missions against armor concentrations. Precision-guided munitions, satellite targeting, drone operations have replaced dive bombers. The tactical environment that created Rudel no longer exists. Whether destroying those tanks was heroic or simply efficient execution of military orders remains debated. He fought for a regime that committed systematic atrocities. He never participated directly in those atrocities. He flew dive bombers against military targets. The moral calculus is complicated. Modern air forces study his methods while condemning the cause he served. The tactics work. The politics were wrong. Both statements are true simultaneously. His grave is in Dornhausen Cemetery. Headstone reading: Hans Ulrich Rudel, 1916–1982, Oberst, Luftwaffe. No mention of tanks destroyed or missions flown or decorations received. Just name, dates, rank. The numbers exist in military archives, aviation history books, and Luftwaffe records captured by Allied forces in 1945. They are documented, verified, and disturbing in their magnitude. Gaterman survived the war, lived in West Germany, refused interviews about Rudel for 40 years. In 1987, 5 years after Rudel's death, he finally spoke to a historian. "We flew together 18 months. He destroyed 200 tanks in that time. I watched from the rear seat. Every dive looked like suicide. Every pullout looked impossible. 200 times I thought we would die. 200 times we didn't. He was the best pilot I ever saw and probably insane." Those two facts are not contradictory. You don't survive 2,530 missions by being sane. You survive by being better at mathematics than the enemy is at shooting. Soviet tank crews who survived encounters with Rudel were interviewed after the Cold War ended. One T-34 commander, Vladimir Petrov, described engagement in March 1945. "We heard the Stuka siren. Our entire column opened fire, hundreds of guns shooting at one aircraft. He dove through it all, straight down like falling stone, fired his cannons. My battalion commander's tank exploded. Then he climbed away, trailing smoke. We hit him. We know we hit him. But he kept flying. We thought he was supernatural. Later we learned he was just very skilled and very determined. Those are more dangerous than supernatural." The numbers tell a story that transcends politics. 2,530 missions over 5 years equals 1.38 missions per day every day for 1,126 consecutive days. That pace is mathematically impossible unless the pilot never took leave, never attended training, never had aircraft unavailable for maintenance. Rudel's actual average was higher because missions were concentrated during active combat phases. During Battle of Kursk, July 1943, he flew 79 missions in 19 days. That's 4.2 missions per day. Each mission required pre-flight inspection, mission brief, flight to target, attack run, return, debrief, and maintenance check. Minimum time per mission cycle was 90 minutes. 4.2 missions per day meant he was in cockpit or preparing for cockpit 9 to 10 hours daily for 19 consecutive days. That level of sustained operation requires physical and mental conditioning beyond normal human capacity. Rudel did not drink alcohol, did not smoke, maintained rigid physical fitness regimen throughout war, slept 6 hours maximum. The rest was flying or preparing to fly. His wingmen rotated frequently from casualties and exhaustion. He never rotated. Command tried to ground him multiple times for rest. He refused or ignored orders. By 1945, he was effectively operating independently, selecting targets, launching missions without approval, landing, rearming, launching again. This obsessive pattern is documented in Luftwaffe records and witnesses' accounts. It explains the numbers but does not justify them morally. A man can be simultaneously the most skilled practitioner of a craft and in service to evil cause. History contains this duality constantly. The craft and the cause are separate analytically. They were inseparable in practice. Rudel's tanks destroyed supported Wehrmacht operations that were part of wars of aggression and genocide. His skill enabled harm. Studying that skill while acknowledging the harm is the only honest approach. Modern military ethicists use Rudel as case study in problematic competence. Peak skill in service to wrong cause creates dilemma. Do you study the tactics and risk appearing to lionize the man, or ignore the tactics and lose valuable knowledge? The consensus is uncomfortable middle ground. Study tactics clinically. Acknowledge historical context completely. Separate technical analysis from moral judgment. Use the knowledge while condemning the cause. Hans Ulrich Rudel destroyed 519 tanks using obsolete aircraft, mathematical precision, and absolute commitment. The politics were catastrophically wrong. The tactics were devastatingly effective. Both facts coexist. History refuses to be simple. The numbers remain: 519 tanks, 2,530 missions, 5 years of war. They are written in military records, Soviet casualty reports, and the scars left on landscapes where burning tanks marked his flight paths. The mathematics closed when the war ended. The questions remain open.